Okay.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. It's the Discuss the Design Challenge again, and we're going to talk about how to use and contribute to the design system. We have quite a few people to join us today. So we have Tim and Imran from GDS, who works on the design system, and we have Robert King, who is a designer in Minister of Justice, I think, if I got it right. And he will share some of the project work he's done and how he ended up contributing to the design system. It's me, Lena, here, service designer GDS, who hosts this session with Martin. And yeah, let's get going. So before we start, we always go through this, but there's some rules of the road. So we allow everyone to present their work first, and then we take questions afterwards. You can either write it in the chat if you don't want to talk, or otherwise you can come off mute and ask the question in the end. We will record a session. I think Martin might have already started. So if you don't want to be recorded, please leave, and then we will post a Slack link or a YouTube link on Slack so you can see it afterwards. We want to briefly mention some user-centered design activities the GDS offer. So Martin ran the services week. It was a few weeks back now. Do you want to talk about that, Martin? How did it go?
First of all, it was all of us doing this. It was not just myself, like quite a few people from all across government were involved. And yeah, it was a whole week of events, of activities, of sessions related to service transformation in a user-centered way. So we have now 19, and I think today we can upload the very last one. 20 recordings. So there is a hidden YouTube playlist. I'll drop the link here in a second, so you can rewatch, I think, about a third of all the sessions that happened throughout Services Week. And in total, we had indeed 57 sessions organized by 34 organizations. And throughout the week, we've been also publishing quite a few blog posts, both on the service and government and also design and government blog. So also check these out.
Great. We also have the Service Thursday that it happens every month. So the first Thursday every month. So Martin hosted a case study which starts at 12 and is always at 12 o'clock. He will send a link to that session on Slack. And then we have this Discuss the Design Challenge, which we also will share on Slack. We also want to talk about this feedback session. It's really like, it's been thoughtful, and I know Jeremy and is it Cara that's done it. They really try to give this opportunity for people to ask for feedback from others in government, and it's not been loads of people signing up for it. It might be a bit scary to ask for feedback when you don't know the other people, but they are there. It's I think it's every Wednesday, is it, Martin? And it's open for anyone who's designing something, so you don't have to be a designer. You can be a product manager or a user researcher. You might have a wireframe, a journey map, a persona, and you just want to have feedback on that piece of work. Yeah, it's every Wednesday between 11 and 12:30. It's not the whole time. I think it's 15-minute sessions, but it's a very safe space, and there will be a facilitator. There'll be you sharing your work, and then we try to find some designers that can give you some feedback. And this is the link to sign up. We can share it on the chat as well, so you can click it if you want to join them. But let's get going with this week's subject. So this is about contributing to the GovUK design system, and I will hand over to Tim or Imran, who's presenting.
I think I'm going to kick off, but I think we're all going to have a go at presenting. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Hopefully, I'm going to try and share my screen, and please somebody let me know if that works. So let's see. Can everybody see?
Yes, that works.
Okay, fantastic. And hopefully when I click this, you can see the loose agenda there, 5 points. Great. Okay, hi everybody. My name's Tim. I'm the head of interaction design at GDS, and I've been working closely with the GovUK design system team for a couple of years now. So we're going to talk about one particular aspect of the design system today, which is contribution, something we take very seriously, and we've tried to integrate into the fabric of the service, if you like. So this is the very rough agenda of what we're going to cover. I'll give a brief intro to the design system just for anybody who's not familiar with it, and then talk about the different ways in which people outside of the design system team in GDS can make contributions to it, and why we value that, and why that's important to us. And then I'm going to hand over to Rob King, who's going to give us a sort of 10-15 minute case study of a particular contribution that he made, or is making actually, as we speak. And hopefully that will be useful and interesting, and you can kind of see what's involved in making that kind of contribution. And then I'm going to hand over to Imran, who's our community manager, and he's going to talk about some of the plans that we've got for contribution as a service feature of the design system. And there'll be plenty of time afterwards, I think, for Q&A. So if you've got any questions, please pop them into the chat or save them for the end if you want. But if no one has any questions right now, I'll crack on. Okay, so firstly, a quick intro to the GovUK design system. It's for those who don't know, it's a suite of tools that are designed to help teams in government quickly build usable, accessible services for GovUK. So you probably all know GovUK presents as a single, coherent, big website full of information and services, but under the hood, it's hundreds of separately managed websites and transactional services maintained by different teams all around the country in different departments, and they're all working independently of each other to some extent, but they all need to produce something that looks and feels like GovUK, that's as accessible and responsive and robust as GovUK. And so the challenge we've had since we launched GovUK really is how do we let teams do that quickly? And so the design system is our attempt to solve that problem. It's being used, we think, by more than 900 live services now. Actually counting the number of people using it is more of a challenge than we first thought. But we think there are about 900 live services using the design system. And if you take a look on GitHub, which is a code hosting platform, which is very popular in government, then we found more than 2,300 repositories, code libraries on GitHub that are using the design system. So that gives you a sense of how many things it's being used in. And that's not just live services, but that's kind of internal things as well, like intranets and admin systems and so on. So this is the homepage of the design system. And really it's a suite of, like I say, three tools. This is how we think about it. So you've got the design system itself, which is a website that contains what we call styles and components and patterns. So styles and components are like the building blocks of all the things that you see on GovUK. It's the color palettes, it's the grids, it's the layouts, it's the typography for things like headings and links and so on. And all of these things are coded and can be copied and pasted into your service. And they all come with guidance about how to and how not to use these things for making things like GovUK. And then from the styles and components, people can build bigger things that are the size of a page or even bigger. And so we describe those things as patterns. And so we've got patterns for lots of things. We try to frame them in terms of the problem that they're solving for users. So here's a pattern for how to ask users for dates. And there's different kinds of dates, and you have slightly different approaches to asking for them. And we've got patterns for lots of different things, all the kinds of things that you might need to ask users, for example, but like larger scale things as well, like how to help users actually check whether they're eligible to use your service so that they don't waste time trying to apply for something that they're not eligible for, that kind of stuff. So that's the design system. We also have a thing called the prototype kit, which some of you might have used. So it's a tool for using the design system and quickly creating very high fidelity HTML-based prototypes that you can take into user research and learn from and iterate quickly. And they're using all the same styles and components as the design system. They use a lot of the same accessibility features, so you can really do quite detailed user research with these things, more than you could do with, for example, Figma or Sketch, although there's definitely a place for those tools as well. We might talk about that in a bit. And then the third product in the suite is called GovUK Frontend, and that's kind of, if you've heard of Twitter Bootstrap, this is like Bootstrap for government. So this is the underlying code base that makes all of the things, the styles and the components. So it's the HTML, it's the CSS, it's the JavaScript. And really our aim here is to produce something which is almost like the most accessible, responsive version of this thing that you can find out there. That's where we put most of our effort into the code, is to making sure that this stuff works really well across all of the assistive technologies that we know about, that it works really well on mobile, that it's really lightweight and fast and snappy. So that's GovUK front end. We did a recent analysis actually, and we saw that pages that had been built with GovUK front end on GovUK were about twice as fast as those that that hadn't, and that's basically because they use half as much code. But alongside those three tools, we also do a lot of community stuff. We provide training for things like the prototype kit. We provide a lot of support, kind of 9 to 5 support across multiple different support channels, things like GitHub itself, but also Slack and Zendesk. And we also actively encourage and facilitate and steward contributions into the design system from people outside the team. So that might be people in other teams in GDS, but it might equally be people from other teams in other government departments, and even outside of government. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the different forms of different ways that people can make contributions to the design system, and then we're going to kind of focus in on one particular contribution. The reason we focus heavily on contributions, so we've had this idea that this is important from the start. When we first launched the design system, we were thinking about all the problems we were trying to solve, and one of them was scaling. Like, how are we going to possibly publish all of the things that we know people need when we're only this small team of like between 8 and 12 people? But also, you know, we're a team in GDS. We're one step removed from frontline services. We don't actually deliver many transactional services that are used by citizens or businesses. That's what other departments do. And so we needed to create this feedback loop from the actual service teams themselves into the design system, because they're the people who are doing the user research with the end users, and they're the people who know what their users need the most, and they're the people who can help us improve these components and patterns. And so we realized that having a really strong feedback cycle in the form of contribution would be a really good way to both scale, but also to make sure that the quality and the relevance of these things was appropriate. Everything I'm talking about, the best place to go find out more about it is probably the community section in the design system. So you can see that on the screen there. And there you will find like all of the things that we probably mention in a minute, things like information about the working group and the criteria that you need to meet, and how you might go about making a contribution. So yeah, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the different ways that you can contribute, but we thought that we'd maybe leave a more detailed discussion to the end for Q&A. So I'm just going to quickly rattle off. I think that the point I want to make is there are lots of ways that people can contribute. You don't have to be a developer. You don't have to dedicate days and days of your time, although Rob is going to talk about a particular example where he did just that. But there are loads and loads of different ways that people can make contributions, and we value all of them. We're grateful for all of them. These are some of the ones that I could think of yesterday. So we have a backlog, which is a kind of discussion space for all of the things inside the design system. And we're very, very grateful when people post research findings or even just ask questions about a particular thing, because we can use that information to improve the guidance for a component or pattern. We're very grateful when people jump onto our support channels, which are kind of semi-open. You can go into Slack, and if somebody's asking a question there and you happen to know the answer, we have lots of examples of people doing that, really like the community of users helping each other. We really rely on that. You know, we do run 9 to 5 support. We have one person from the team on support every day, but sometimes there's just too much to do to be, you know, really, really responsive. And so when the community steps in, that's a really lovely thing to see. We definitely value that a lot. There's another really big way that people can support the design system, which perhaps we don't talk about enough, which is by maintaining a port. So a port is like a copy of the design system that works in a different language or works in a different prototyping tool. So we've got designers who are maintaining ports of the design system in things like Sketch and Balsamic and Adobe XD and Figma. And we have developers who are maintaining ports of GovUK front end, which is the code base, for languages like Node and Python, and in frameworks like React and Ruby on Rails. And so again, this is not something that we could do ourselves, because we don't have the skills or the time or the size of team to be able to maintain multiple ports in multiple languages. We don't control the tech stacks that are used across government, and it varies wildly. You know, there are 20 odd different templating languages that I think we've seen used in government services. So this is really how we solve that problem. It's a community effort. And then the last 4 things on that list are different things that people can do around new components or existing components and patterns. So just raising an issue about an existing component or pattern is really helpful to us. If you've seen a problem, if there's a bug, if it doesn't work in a certain browser or piece of assistive technology, it's really helpful for us to know about that. You might even go as far as like having a solution to that. Maybe you've got some guidance that you want to improve, or maybe there's a bit of code that you've produce which can fix a problem. And so pull requests on GitHub, or even just telling us about what you've done, is really, really valued. And then in this final space, you've got people who've got ideas for new useful components or patterns, and people who want to actually take a proposal for a new component or pattern and run with it to make it and produce it and publish it and get it into the design system. And that's what we're going to focus on next. And I think first of all, I'll give you a few examples actually of things that have been contributed into the design system by other people from other teams. So in the last 12 months, we've had things like these nice multicolored tags, status tags for use in kind of more complex user interfaces like admin systems and caseworking tools. We've had prefixes and suffixes for form fields so that you can represent things like currencies and items and so on, weights and kilograms and that kind of stuff. We've had tabs. That was one of our first external contributions, maybe even our first one actually. So tabbed panels, and also accordions, which you're probably familiar with if you've been on GovUK before, and also whole patterns. So we had some really good contributions in the first few months of the design system for things like error pages, page not found, sorry the service is unavailable kind of pages. And it's not just the page pattern itself, it's all the guidance around how you should write that content and when you should display the page and timeouts and things like that. So all of this stuff is really, really valued. I'm going to hand over now to Rob, who's going to give us a case study about some work that he and his team have been doing, which eventually found its way as a contribution into the design system, and hopefully will be being published quite soon, I think. So Rob, do you want to pick up and share screen? Would that be easier?
Yeah, probably, Tim. Let me try.
I'll stop sharing now.
Okay. Right, let's try this. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. So the first thing I want to say is that this has been sort of very much like a hugely collaborative piece of work. So within the Czech legal aid team within the MOJ, this was something we identified, but it was also a bit of work that was being done by DWP, and also the Scottish Government had already got something on their domestic abuse pages. And I think the Cabinet Office and sort of GDS had implemented something like an MVP on the coronavirus pages. So this is, I'll give you a little bit of a context around how the Czech legal aid team came to sort of address the problem, and then how we kind of collaborated across government. So we actually had this design kind of in the backlog within our, and it was deprioritized initially, and it was only really sort of at the start of lockdown during at the start of COVID where we actually saw in the news things like with the increase in domestic abuse and the numbers going up, that it was noticed on our service by, I'm going to say SME, but essentially it's my wife who works in social care, and she works with domestic abuse survivors. And she actually spotted on our service that we don't actually provide a way for victims and survivors to leave our website safely. So we picked the ticket up from our backlog, and we explained to the product manager that we needed to kind of prioritize it. So that's kind of how it all kind of came about. So just in terms of like some of the numbers that came out from the start of lockdown, so there was 40,000 calls to the domestic abuse helpline, the shocking number of 50 women and children that died, which is the highest number in 11 years, and then obviously the huge increase in traffic to the site. So within Czech Legal Aid, what we did was we kind of put the feelers out across government through Slack, just to kind of see what was who might have been working on a similar thing. Vicky Tanaki kindly put us in touch with Jenny, who was working in DWP on a similar problem within the child maintenance service. And that kind of started the conversations off. So literally just from a quick Slack message, it kind of escalated quite quickly. We looked through some other charity organisations that had already got this sort of feature on their service. Again, we spoke to the subject matter expert about the risks to users. We built something quite quickly using the button component. So we essentially extended that component and we got something up pretty quickly. Within sort of a week or two, we'd had something on our live service. We were able to track the usage through GA. And also at the same time, we were having a DAC, Digital Accessibility Centre audit on our service, and we got them to factor the, at the time, quick exit component into their audit. So we got some findings from that pretty quick as well, which was really good. We did a bit of a session with our SME to look at the biggest risks to users and the behaviour of users when they're coming on to a government website, for example, or a charity website, kind of looking at their sort of state of mind, their the risk factors that are sort of external, whether it's where they are in the house, like whether or not the perpetrator is in the house with them. And we got some really kind of quite shocking information. And I've actually got an example in here, which is a real live case that had happened in local government. So essentially what happened was the perpetrator had hid a marble in the house, and they'd basically told the victim that they had to find the marble, otherwise there'd be a consequence, which essentially puts the pressure on that victim to then try and find the marble, and they can't then go away and try and find this information to how they can like flee or get information about how they can leave that relationship. So it was quite shocking, and obviously just show to us as a delivery team why we needed to prioritize this. Oh, sorry, that's my dog. Oh, sorry, one sec. Henry, come here. I'm just conscious this is going to be on video, isn't it? Sorry.
It's very lovely. No, it's fine.
He's a lovely dog, but that's all right. I think he's finished. So sorry. Anyway, so what we did as a working group, we created the cross-government working group, and there was about four teams. So there was DWP, Cabinet Office, and Scottish Government and the MOJ. We arranged quite frequent sort of catch-ups to discuss the different work that was going on. So DWP had something on their child maintenance pages, and again, it was very much an MVP. So they were, we were just sort of discussing the design and the behaviour, and then we basically got together and we looked at sort of coordinating our submission. So I think the first thing was that we wanted to try and align that approach. So on CLA, we'd originally had quick exit. From the discussions that we'd had with DWP and some initial research, and the fact that the Scottish Government had already implemented something similar on their service, we agreed that we would move along to the hide this page language. So we wanted to try and get that consistency. We also improved some of the accessibility features on the component. So looking at obviously the HTML structure and where the information was read out to screen readers to alert them of where the button, what the button did and where it was. So we then kind of tried to unify that design approach a little bit. And as you can see, there's some sort of various inconsistencies across this, but this is essentially each service working on their own design before something goes into the design system itself. We looked at the data that was on our service, and as you can see that throughout lockdown, as things started to open up, we saw a rise in the number of times that the button was used. And it's kind of, it's obvious that the Premier League returns, so people are going to be going out and going to like pubs and bars. And then we saw numbers as restrictions were lifted further, they actually went down quite a lot. So we're not entirely sure why that was, but we think it was probably something to do with the fact that more people were out and about, and there was more opportunity for people to go and seek sort of help in organizations that would then open. So we created a shared document, Google Doc, and started to collaborate on that together. We fleshed that out probably over the course of about a month, I think it was. Once we'd agreed on the actual content, so we had a content designer working on that within my team, and then everyone was sort of feeding back into that. We then forked the design system, built our component out, which was quite straightforward to do, and then we put a pull request through to the design system, and it was really good because I think it automatically generates a URL which you can then have a look at the component in like a sort of a test environment, which was really helpful for us to be able to sort of share around the working group. And then yeah, so then the next thing, a few of us met with Tim just to kind of go through a couple of the initial queries before we submitted the component. And I think we submitted it around October. So I think one of the biggest challenges, which I'll touch on the next slide, is that timescales and arranging diaries is probably the biggest challenge, because when you've got 4 different departments working on one submission, you're trying to get everyone's feedback at the right time. You're trying to yeah, essentially just coordinate 16, in our example, like about 16 people's diaries, which was quite a challenge. So we then received the feedback from the panel, which was really good to get back. And it's essentially like a yes or no that we got back. And then over the last couple of months, again with diaries and like Christmas and everything, we've just got round to kind of picking it back up again. And where we are at the moment is that we're going to send our proposal back to the design system based on their feedback. So that's the next step. So this is essentially what it looks like within the pull request. So, and then the key learnings and challenges, I think, sorry if I'm over time, by the way, I'm going to blame the dog, but basically coordinating the work. Coordinating the working group was definitely one of the biggest challenges. I think just by the very nature of people's access to like everyone's calendars across government was a challenge. Another thing that was really interesting was the fact that, and this is something that I actually recognized not within myself, but we didn't experience this within the working group, but the fact that there's no room for egos. I think as designers, it can be like, if you're working in the public or private sector, sometimes there's designers who are very precious about their design work. But one of the things that we kept on saying as we were going through the process was, we're building something to keep users safe. And I remember attending one of the design system working group calls, and Tim asked me what the biggest risk was to users. And essentially it was that like the perpetrator could commit a murder. So it's like, that's, as long as the button works, as long as it gets the user off the website safely, that's the most important thing. Doesn't matter what the design is, as long as it works and it essentially does what we need it to do. Ownership was another big learning and challenge. You can't, I suppose from my own perspective, it's something that you're really passionate about, and you want to sort of see it through to the end, but you've still got to balance that with your delivery team. And so that was another challenge in terms of getting the buy-in from the team, buy-in from like our sort of design community to allow me to free me up to be able to work on this, and also across the other sort of departments as well. So yeah, we needed someone to kind of like drive that forward, and it sort of I would probably say that the responsibility fell to a couple of us within the working group. So to kind of push that through. Commitment as well. Everyone needs to be invested in that submission, because if not everyone is kind of contributing to the process, then you start having to sort of chase people, and basically you start to, it becomes, you're essentially just designing something on your own. if not everyone's invested. And also process as well. This is like something that I wish I'd done. I wish I'd documented it from the very beginning. And so I've promised Michael Chambers, who I think is on this call, that I'm going to put together some kind of like process of the steps that I've taken to get to where we are today, because it's been about a year.
Holding
So
you to that, Rob.
oh, it's recorded as well, isn't it? Damn. So yeah, so basically there's that process that needs to be in place. So I am going to be trying to document something, but I've started a new job today, so you might be waiting a couple of weeks, Michael. And I think that's it. The only other thing I wanted to say was just a massive thank you to both working groups, because the Scottish Government, the DWP, Cabinet Office, everyone's just worked really, really, really hard on this, and it's been really it's such an important design, but also from the working group as well, because we've had such great support from Tim and the team, sort of whether it's what do we do next, how long is this going to take, and Tim's probably bored of all of my questions. So yeah, so it's just a big thank you to everyone working on it. And that's it, I think. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Tim,
Rob.
did you say Imran want to talk next?
Yeah, so I'm going to come in now, if that's okay. I'll just share my screen. My name's Imran Hussain. I'm the community manager for the gov.uk design system, and I guess my role is to just work with the community and kind of get them more involved in contributing to the design system and kind of shaping the direction of how it goes. And I think that's pretty much a very big topic that we're getting the community involved in, which is just kind of planning the future of how contributions or submissions kind of look for the design system. We can move to the next slide, please. So that's really the big piece. I started in January, and I spent the first month or so trying to get a lay of the land, and then try and speak to people about what do you think is working well from your perspective about the gov.uk design system. What else would you like to see? And I think getting more things into the design system and people having more say about what comes next is the big piece of feedback that we kind of got. So we're currently thinking, we've been on a fire break this week, and we spent a lot of time, and the main task was actually how can we improve our submission process so that people can get more involved and they can submit more things and they have a bit more autonomy around all of this, so they can upstream things into the gov.uk design system. Next slide, please. So based on user research that we've done, we have a fantastic user researcher, Rosie Clayton, and we got certain nuggets back about specific things that people wanted. And one of the things that people wanted was a bit more information about the entire process and kind of how long it will take, because people know, oh yeah, I can speak to the team and suggest something, but what does it actually look like? What do I have to do? What's the process kind of look like? And it's kind of why we're running sessions like this, and we're very grateful for Rob to come along and kind of explain the kind of journey that he kind of went through. But yeah, we kind of have to let people know some of the other parts that they'll be doing, because if they're creating a component, we hope as the creator of the component, they will also help us write the guidance, and some people don't take that into account. Next slide, please, Lena. So things we're doing is thinking about how we set those expectations and let people know what the journey looks like. So some of the things we're trying to do are things like this chat, maybe we'll do some podcasts and blog posts, but also what else do we need to create? So are we going to create some guidance? Do we need to do some training to take people through what a kind of average submission or what different types of submissions kind of look like? Next slide, please. Another bit of research that we got was that potential contributors are a bit unsure of the kind of standards that they need to hit. So how good does the design need to be? What are the coding standards? How far do they kind of need to get on accessibility? Next slide. And again, it's another thing that we're currently looking at. And rather than go off and create something that kind of misses the mark, I think the next thing that we're going to do is do a bit of a gap analysis. So what's not there, what's not on our design system pages, and doing some user research with people to actually find out what do you need from some guidance, and what form is that guidance going to take? Because is it some instructions on the design system pages? Do we need to develop some training and talk people through it and give them like a case study and, you know, actually act it out for people to more clearly understand how to do things? Next slide, please, Lena. Another bit of research that we had was that contributors wanted more visibility of what happens when like things are handed over to the design system team. So it's kind of slowly starting to change, but there's usually a bit of a process where contributors do a certain amount of work and we work with them to help shape that, and it goes to the working group. And then it kind of comes over to the design system team, and we do certain things like, you know, we check it for accessibility. We think about how a component or pattern applies to different services across government. And we do all this work, but I think the communication of what was happening and the visibility of what was happening is not necessarily there. So next slide, please, Lena. We're trying to be a little bit more open about our work, and we're trying to have more touch points with the community. So the screenshot you can see is like from one of the Friday design system calls that we have. And as part of that, you know, it runs like a lean coffee, so people can come in and ask a question every single time. But at the start of that session now, every single Friday, we give an update on what the design system team has been working on and how far we are with certain components and patterns that we are working on. So if someone wants to know where a component is at, that's the place to come. And every single week, we'll be telling people where we are with our work. Another thing that we started to do as part of this is I take notes during the session and I share them on Slack and on Twitter afterwards. So even if you miss the call, you can kind of catch back up with the main points by popping into that Google Doc and just having a look what was discussed. Next slide, please. We're also getting the community more involved in kind of like decision making where we can. So we need to do a bit of a refresh of our overall process, and we've been looking at that this week. But in the interim, we're trying to do things like run workshops. So this was a workshop that we ran. The last pattern that we released was one based on asking for equality information, and we promoted that across government, and several people from across government came in and gave us their feedback before we got to a final draft that got submitted. So we were able to take on a bunch of people's opinion and improve that pattern before we went to get it reviewed and checked with other agencies. So that was extremely helpful for us, and I think we're going to keep continuing to try and involve people across government so we can make our products, our components and patterns much, much better. Next slide. What we're hoping to do in the longer term is just get the community even more involved in kind of co-creating or co-designing components and patterns, just so that they're truly involved in the process and that we create better products overall. We are just testing out some of collaboration at the moment. We've got a few little projects happening. There's something with DEFRA around map standards and guidance that might happen. It might not go into the design system, but it'll probably sit somewhere near gov.uk, but not on gov.uk. And then also there's a couple of people interested in a task list pattern or component. So we're going to have a look at how that cross-gov collaboration works. We've got 3 or 4 agencies kind of interested, and yeah, we'll just kind of see how the co-design or co-creation kind of works and hopefully iterate from there. But it's a very exciting time. We're trying lots of new things, people are getting more and more involved. So yeah, if you get the opportunity, we'd love to see you on the Friday design system calls, or if we run any workshops, we'll be promoting those on Slack and Twitter, and we'd love to see you there. And I think that's about it from me. So we've got a bit of time for questions and answers now. So you can kind of like click on the participants tab and put your hand up, or you can post your questions in the chat if you like.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Martin, have you seen if anyone has asked questions early on?
Well, there was just one question about like if the component Rob showed is already available, is not yet there, but
it's basically going to be the next thing that we publish. It's the next contribution in the list. I think one of the things Imran and I and the team are figuring out is how can we kind of make the pipeline, if you like, work in a fairly smooth way. Coordination is the big challenge, I think, because these things are inherently cross boundaries, organizational boundaries, and so that's tough. And for a lot of people, this is not their main responsibility. So yeah, coordination is the thing. I realized as well, one thing we probably didn't talk about, Rob mentioned working groups a few times, and I realized I didn't go into much detail about the actual mechanics of making this kind of contribution. So for something as big as a whole new component or pattern, we try to be very open with regards to assurance, if you like. So we have some criteria for when something is good enough to go into the design system, if you like, to do things like accessibility and usability, and those criteria are published on the design system. But as well as that, we have an independent working group of designers and developers and content designers and user researchers, usually about 10 or 11 people from as many different departments as we can engage with. And they are the people who do the assurance. So they assess the contributions, and they also assess ours, if you like. So if the design system team makes a new component or pattern, we typically put that through the same process, because we're trying really hard to make this as like democratic and as open source in spirit as possible.
Thank you. I had a question. You talk quite a lot about Slack and how people can ask for help on Slack. Can you explain maybe a bit more how they find you on Slack?
Yeah, of course. So there is the cross-government Slack account, which if you have a government email address, you should already have access to it. So it's worth seeking that out. I'm sure we can post a link to that. Although actually the links to our particular Slack channels are on the design system website at the bottom of the homepage. So we have a Slack channel for each of our products. And that's, yeah, like I say, we kind of staff those 9 to 5. So we have a rota on the team. So it's a really good way for us as a team actually to stay in touch with our users and to stay engaged with the kind of the daily challenges that people on teams face. So it keeps us honest, it keeps us real. I tend to do a day a week as well. And so Slack is probably the most snappy support channel, but we also take questions over email and obviously GitHub as well. If people are making pull requests or raising issues, we can have conversations there.
Thank you. Anyone else that has a question?
There's one from Nikin in the chat that says, has there been scenarios where a component has been updated even after being published in the design system?
Yes, many. I guess there are different ways that things can be different things can trigger an update once something has already been published. If somebody finds a bug, then that's immediately a priority and we just work to fix it, and that includes accessibility issues. So something like fixing an accessibility issue wouldn't go through the working group assurance process. We just do the work and fix it. So that's one way that a thing can be updated. People can make suggestions about content and guidance and things like that, and we've made kind of small updates regularly for those reasons as well. Occasionally we have kind of a more significant update to a component, and if it's significant enough, we tend to put that through the full-bodied assurance process. So one of the examples I showed earlier was this new multicolored tags, status tags. So the first iteration of status tag, you could have a blue one and that was it. And then I think it was Adam Silver, who was at DFE at the time. he'd been working on some more kind of slightly more complex user interfaces for caseworking tools and so on, and had really found the benefit of representing things with different colors, obviously not with color alone because of accessibility reasons, but for really information dense, regularly used services that people are using all day, you want to try and optimize for efficient use as well as kind of usability. So they have the role to play in. And I think the biggest challenge with that contribution actually was writing the guidance to explain the appropriate use cases, because we don't want these rainbow colored tags just appearing everywhere for no good reason. So crafting the guidance is a thing I think that maybe catches a few contributors by surprise, because obviously the focus on the team is in doing the design and the code and making it work and making it accessible. But in order to prepare something for publishing in a design system, you need to be a lot more rigorous about documenting the research and the rationale. So that's a thing to be aware of if you're considering making a contribution. That yeah, the guidance is definitely a thing.
Nikin says, thanks for your answer, Tim. There's something from Vicky Tanaki in the it's something I've seen is that design systems contributions are based on motivated individuals.
Yeah.
This means that sometimes representation from bigger departments are surprisingly absent. Will departments be encouraged to support more?
It's a really good question. We've thought about this a lot. Like what motivates people to make contributions is quite subtle. There are, like you say, it requires a fair amount of confidence, a fair amount of time, a fair amount of kind of a range of skills, access to information, all of these things, and that tends to create a pressure towards maybe a lack of diversity in contributions in the past, and it's something that we've actively tried to address, and we'll continue to do so. I think maybe about a year ago, Lou Down published a blog post where they talked about what makes for a good corporate objective. If you're a permanent employee, you know, a permanent civil service designer, what counts as a good corporate objective to take to your line manager? And I think in that blog post, which I should try and dig out, making a contribution to the design system was called out as one of those types of things. Ah, nice one, thank you. So I'm not sure how much like official pressure we can apply to departments. We've tended to operate through powers of persuasion as much as anything else, and so that's what we'll continue to do. It is a challenge, though. It is a challenge. Like maybe Rob can talk about how you manage to carve out the additional time you need to like craft one of these things for a design system.
Just to quickly add to what Tim just said, in addition to that, like we have on the backlog for design and government blog, we have a follow-up blog post where we want to show like some examples where people have been doing the things mentioned in that blog post. So nice. We want to show as well like what people in all the different regards, because some people have been like running training, for example, contributed to the design system and different things, just showing what this in practice look like to encourage more people to do it. So that's one thing to come in the next few months. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think so. I mean, ours was originally in our team's backlog, so we were quite lucky that we were able to kind of get the product manager on board. But I think from the design community perspective, I think we're quite fortunate that we have a head and leads that are kind of keen for us to be involved with the collaborative work. So, and if there's an opportunity for any of our designers to collaborate on projects, then it's encouraged. And it's interesting, Tim, about that, like whether it's as part of your objectives as a civil servant, for example, in terms of like trying to get involved with more collaborative bits of work with the design system. But yeah, I think I've been quite fortunate to be not given free rein when it comes to this component, but certainly a lot of the time that's taken out of my time over the last year has been sort of trying to coordinate diaries and like set up the documents and everything. So, but I think people just kind of just let me get on with it, I suppose, which is a great thing.
I think it's funny, we were, because of the time of year, we were talking the other day about maybe everybody who makes a contribution gets some nice written feedback from the team that they're able to use in end of year reviews and so on. You know, there are lots of ways that we can help to motivate people or create the space for them to do this work.
Yeah. I think this probably slightly touches on my role, because I'm kind of doing engagement across government, and I think one thing we've got to kind of be aware of, there's like different levels, isn't there? So individually, if someone's going to make a contribution, I guess they have to feel like they're able to make a contribution, they've got the expertise, or they're not too intimidated by it. If they're doing it for the first time, I guess as a team, the design system team have to kind of support people through it and make sure we kind of guide them through it and give them the appropriate support so they're not kind of put off. But from an individual department level, I guess it's really difficult because the environment and the pressures on each single department are so very different. I guess a part of what we can do going forward is just try to engage, you know, heads of interaction design, heads of development in each department, and like Vicky said, try and encourage them as much as possible. But how they put their messaging out is very much kind of up to them. So there's only so much control we have centrally, but I think longer term, you know, one thing that we do want to create is like a bit more of a formal community. So even if, you know, you're not able to get help with resources within the department, if you can't ask for help with from a developer, or you can't ask for help with from other designers or a content designer to write the guidance. Hopefully, if we create a community of practice kind of thing, maybe a few departments can get together and share resources to create components together and upstream those. So that's something we're thinking about in the future. Obviously, it really depends on people's enthusiasm and people putting the time and effort in to do that. But I'm really excited about the possibilities, and hopefully we will see more and more of that going forward.
I've just seen another question from David, which is one that has come up from time to time. So David's asking about sometimes people struggle to use some of the patterns in more complex kind of internal services, things like admin tools and caseworking systems that are used, and like almost a sort of separate but related challenge, which is I guess POs or product owners questioning your thinking, and like this is definitely a challenge. The original priority for the design system was public-facing, citizen and business-facing services, and so that's where we've started, and we've been very careful not to go down the route of creating a separate system for internal tools or admin systems, because we figured that might create kind of these like a two-tier system, or it might encourage people to make things more complex than they perhaps need to be. But at the same time, we recognize that things like one thing per page are optimized for low repeat use, first-time users, people who whose priority is getting the thing right rather than doing it fast, perhaps is a way to put it. And that's not quite the same as designing for somebody who's using a tool all day long, or a couple of hours a day. So we recognize that there are other use cases that we do need to support. And I think what the way that will come through is that we're going to start to prioritize the contributions that we try and solicit from the community, and we're going to probably prioritize the ones that have value across both internal and public-facing services. But also, you absolutely should be able to adapt components and patterns for these slightly different use cases. And if you do have trouble convincing people in your organization, please do get in touch, because obviously there's something we could probably do to help you create compelling arguments.
Thank you. Is there any questions? We're running out of time.
Yeah, there's one from Jody right at the end addressed to Rob. I guess you've just typed an answer, but Rob, you can kind of talk through it. And it's kind of, how did you select people for the working group for your component that you worked on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of, as I said, kind of happened quite naturally, where we reached out to one department who we were put in touch with, and then attending another meeting, someone else had mentioned that another department were working on it. So eventually, when we got to the point where we kind of knew what everyone was working on, we then just had that as essentially our little working group. And then depending on the problem that we were trying to discuss, we'd get, say, like devs coming into the sessions. But I think we had a product manager from GDS, a user researcher from DWP, and an interaction designer from Scottish Government. And then obviously they would bring in whoever needed to come into those sessions to discuss the component.
Thank you. I think that's quite common. I hear that in many projects when you're trying to create a community around you. You start somewhere and someone will know someone. It's never formal. It's just like start to talk to people and you will find people around you that can help you. It is hard to navigate government sometimes, but you start with someone and they will give you contact to someone else. It might take a while, but you will get there. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I think we're running out of time. But it's been really great. I hope people learned some new things. Martin, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Thanks, everyone. Really good session. Yeah, there's also another blog post in the making specifically about that component. I think it's almost written. Rob has spent and others spent quite a bit of time on putting a blog post related to this work together. So that's also something to look out for. It will be published on the Design and Government blog in the next few weeks, I guess.
Great.
Thanks,
and we
everyone.
will share the link for this session maybe or probably on Tuesday next week after the Easter holiday.
Excellent.
Have a nice Easter, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a nice weekend.